3 days, Kevin would behave like you wouldn't believe. So maybe the spirits are reaching out in the car and telling him, hey, you better behave.
Hey, something,
Yeah.
right? I was scared of the cemetery and stuff like that back then, so.
Well, I'll be honest, I'm scared of him now, so.
Well, I told you about being a spooky little kid and loving ghost stories, but really being really freaked out about anything real. But yeah, we went on when I was I think I was about 8. Yes, I must have been 8. My younger sister was 5, and we went on this family vacation. And my younger sister had just been born, so she was in kind of a little Moses basket in the car. And we went on a family vacation to Missouri, where my mom had friends. Went to visit them. So it was me, my 2 sisters, and our cousin in the back seat. And all of it, my dad drove late into the night, and all the kids had been passed out for hours. So apparently, at some point in the evening, my dad stopped, and my mom and dad set up their tent and took the baby with them into the tent and left. I mean, the 3 of us, older kids, were just dead to the world. So they left us sleeping in the back seat. And I think I was the one who got up first, and I blearily lifted my head and put my glasses on and looked around and realized, to my abject horror, that my father had not gone to a hotel. He had not stopped in a campground. Instead, he had been very frugal and thrifty and decided to stop and camp in a cemetery. Yeah, so you got 3 impressionable little kids in the car. Oldest one is 8 years old. And they wake up having spent the night in a cemetery. We just about lost our dang minds.
Yeah. It's funny you said that, because you know what? The other night I was talking about when I was in high school, our photo teacher would take us out on weekend trips, and there was up in Washington, a town called Roslyn, and it has like the state's oldest cemetery in it. Actually, there's like 2 cemeteries one across each other, and we stayed there and we were taking pictures the whole day, and then instead of going to a campground, we did the same thing. We actually camped. We got permission by the city what was left of the ghost town to camp, and we camped in the cemetery. And I'll tell you, I didn't sleep at all. It was like the scariest. I'll be honest with you, it was the scariest thing I've ever had in my life. I mean, you sit there and you don't know somebody's going to come out and reach and grab you from the ground and pull you in.
Right? I mean, you may be on the edge and they may be all over there, but they're still all over there.
Yeah, but when it's funny, and I've been back there several times since, to do, because I love photography. And I walk, through. I'm sorry, I got a dog back here. It's barking.
No
I'm
problem.
sorry, people. I got a dog in my studio. But we'd be, walking. Me and my wife would be walking there, looking at the graves, and some of the graves would say how they died, like they died in the mine and stuff like that. And I could feel, while I was walking, I could feel like the pain, and it was strange. I'd just be walking by these graves, and I could feel the hurt and the pain and the loss. And as soon as I left the cemetery, that feeling went away. But then when I was by some of the graves, I could really feel it stronger than others.
Oh, I believe that. I mean, it's not only natural empathy, but yeah, it could have been something else. It could have been somebody trying to get your attention.
I don't know what it was, but I tell you that I make a point not going to the cemetery. So I know eventually I'm going to be there, guys. But I mean, I want to stay out of there as long as possible. Now, have you actually gone into cemeteries with a recorder and picked up anything?
I haven't gotten anything really good in the cemeteries, but I know people who have. Um, in a nutshell, because I don't know how much time we have left.
Oh, we got a half an hour at least.
Oh, okay. Um, all right. Well, then I'll tell this entire story so that the punchline, the cemetery punchline, makes sense. One of our most beloved spirits on the hilltop is Rhoda Derry.
Uh-huh.
She was a young lady who she grew up in Adams County in southern Illinois. She was born in 1834. She was a beautiful, beautiful young girl, youngest daughter of 9 children. Um, when she was 16 years old, she met the son of a neighboring farm family, also 16 years old. We don't know how far Charles Phoenix and Rhoda Derry's relationship went, but we do know that when they had been courting for a couple of years, when they were both 18 years old, Charles asked Rhoda to marry him, and she said yes. Now, the problem with this is that the Derrys were dirt poor. They never had land of their own. They were always farming other people's land, and she was the youngest of 9 children. Charles Phoenix, on the other hand, was the oldest son of only 4 children. So he stood to inherit his father's land after Frederick passed on.
Uh-huh.
And Charles' mother, Nancy Phoenix, was not about to have her baby boy Charles marry one of these dirt poor Derrys. She was very much against the relationship. So much against this relationship was she that she confronted Rhoda in the street and threatened to curse her.
Oh, wow.
She said, "If you do not release my son from this engagement, I will curse you." Now, the thing about this is that talking about witchcraft in front of Rhoda Derry really would have gotten her attention very quickly. Rhoda's grandmother, Moll Derry, was known as the fortune teller of the Revolution. Moll actually emigrated with her husband, Valentine, to the colonies. Valentine was a Hessian soldier and was conscripted into the British Army. Moll was not about to be left behind, so she disguised herself as a man and traveled with him. Once there, Valentine switched sides, fought for the Americans in the American Revolution, and Moll, still dressed as a man, fought right alongside him.
Okay, that's...
Yeah. Moll's a very cool character in her own right. After the war, they settled in Pennsylvania, and Moll became a practitioner of Pennsylvania Dutch hex magic. She was known for counties around as being able to lift and to cast curses. Very powerful practitioner. So, talking in front of witchcraft, in front of Moll Derry's granddaughter, Rhoda, really would have made a big impression. Several weeks after this confrontation with Nancy Phoenix, Rhoda had some sort of break with consensual reality.
Uh-huh.
She started hallucinating. She swore that invisible witches were flying around the cabin and swooping down to attack her. She went downhill very quickly. After a couple of years, her parents decided to have her committed to the Illinois Hospital for the Insane at Jacksonville. This is a state hospital. Peoria State Hospital didn't exist yet. This was way before it got started.
Uh-huh.
But the thing about the heartbreaking thing about this part of the story is that before she was committed to Jacksonville, Nancy Phoenix actually tried to get in to see Rhoda. And, well, Rhoda was not about to see her. And the family, the Derry family, was not about to let Nancy Phoenix in to see Rhoda.
Uh-huh.
But she said, I mean, this is a small town. News travels fast. She knew what she had done, and she came to the Derry cabin to try and apologize. She tried to say, there is no curse. You're fine. Snap out of it. But the damage had already been done. So Rhoda was committed to the state hospital at Jacksonville. She was there for 2 years. She was discharged as incurable. State hospitals in those days only had a limited number of beds, and they figured that if you had 2 years to get better, and if you did not get better in that time, you had to give up your bed to somebody who had a chance to actually recover.
Oh, wow.
The weird thing is that Rhoda was a very violent patient. She was locked in her room every night, and every morning she would be found wandering the grounds looking for Charles. And the attendants would find her, and they would bring her back to the building, and they would say, "Who let you out? You were locked in your room. How did you get out?" And her answer was always the same. "Nancy Phoenix let me out."
Wow.
No one's ever been able to explain that.
Yeah. I mean, that's, you know.
I have my own theory, but
What's your theory?
My theory is that Rhoda was so traumatized by this, by being committed and kept away from Charles, that she created a tulpa. She created a thought form that took the form of Nancy Phoenix.
Now, that is possible. That could have, yeah. That's interesting.
So,
yeah.
Rhoda's discharged after 2 years as being incurable. Her family cares for her at home as long as they could, but in 1860, her mother dies. So her father cannot no longer care for her at home, so he makes the heart-wrenching decision to have her committed to the Adams County almshouse.
Uh-huh.
Now, almshouses back in those days had the potential to be really wretched places. If you had $25 for a license and an old barn in your backyard, you could open up an almshouse, because as we discussed at the very beginning of this conversation, at that point in time, they didn't think that the mentally ill could feel heat or cold or hunger. In some cases, they were treated no better than animals.
Or worse.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot worse, actually.
The Adams County almshouse was not as bad as some. It was a county-run house. It was on a really nice piece of property, newly built buildings. But the sad fact is that an almshouse or a poor farm is simply a place where if you were down on your luck, you could go and be assured of getting 3 hots and a cot. They were not prepared to deal with the mentally ill. And the Adams County almshouse was absolutely unprepared for someone with Rhoda's depth of crazy. When she was in the almshouse, she developed a condition called pica, which is a compulsion to eat inappropriate objects. She would crawl around on the floor, and anything she found on the floor, a pin, a penny, a nail, would go straight into her mouth. She would lunge at people, women, and try to pick the buttons off of their blouses and swallow them. So for her own protection and for the protection of the other inmates of the almshouse, the superintendent decided to put Rhoda into something called a Utica crib.
Now, what's that?
It's just what it sounds like. It's about the size and shape of a baby's crib, but it doesn't stand up from the floor. It sits directly on the floor. In addition to the bottom and the 4 sides, there's also a barred lid that locks. Now, the Utica crib was standard issue in a lot of mental asylums at that point in time. And it was not designed as an instrument of torture. It was designed to help patients. There was a reporter in the 1880s who tried to do this big expose about the Utica crib and how horrible it was. And he talked to some patients, and one of the patients said, "I sleepwalk. If a nurse puts me into a Utica crib and locks the top, I know where I'm going to wake up, and that's a big comfort for me." But the Utica crib was never designed for use any longer than overnight. And Rhoda was left in this Utica crib for weeks and months at a time.
Oh, my God.
It was lined with straw. Instead of a hospital mattress, it was lined with straw. Mice crawled across her. There was a strategically cut hole at about hip level and